With the benchmark price of a detached home in Vancouver now approaching nearly $2 million, it does seem as though Vancouver is completely unaffordable for families. So I wanted to set myself a challenge. Can I find solid family neighborhoods around Metro Vancouver where you can still find family homes for less than $1 million? I think I might be successful, but you're gonna have to watch this video to find out and see if you agree with me. Let's get into it right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver BC team, and welcome back to the channel. This channel is all about moving to and living in Vancouver. And this week we're talking about the best family neighborhoods where you can find family homes under $1 million. Is it possible? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Everyone says that Vancouver is completely unaffordable for families, and we're going to discover if that's true or not. I'm searching for the best family neighborhoods throughout Metro Vancouver where you can still find family options under $1 million. I'm going to explain to you why people love these neighborhoods, why they're great for families, and some of the things you have to be cautious of when moving to these neighborhoods. And I'm also going to explore exactly what kind of properties you're going to be able to find in these neighborhoods that are relatively affordable for families, what kind of price points you can expect. And I'm also going to find one of the best housing options I can find right now in today's market in these neighborhoods. I'm personally raising 4 kids in Vancouver, and these are neighborhood options and housing options that I would personally consider. I'm super excited to explore this with you and to uncover what we're about to discover. Be sure to stick around to the very end because I've got a bit of a surprise for you, something that actually shocked me personally as I was exploring these options. So without further ado, let's get into one of the best family neighborhoods where you can find housing under $1 million. Right off the bat, we're going to talk about New Westminster, which quite honestly is one of my personal favorite suburbs of Vancouver. It is right over here. So we're a little bit south and a little bit east of the city of Vancouver over here. And New Westminster is really well connected to Vancouver, which is one of the things that people really enjoy about it. It's also very urban. And so if you're desiring sort of an urban experience and you can't quite afford in the city of Vancouver, because that is the most expensive real estate that you're going to find in the region generally, New Westminster might be a good alternative. If you sort of want that urban experience, there's a solid downtown. It's a very vibrant, interesting, eclectic downtown with plenty of amenities. And then you're surrounded by a really nice community that's very diverse, all types of different housing stock throughout New Westminster. And over the last 20 years or so, I'd say it's been a very desirable location for young families to move to, primarily driven by affordability. And so the biggest pros of New Westminster are its SkyTrain access. There are more SkyTrain stops in New Westminster than you're going to find in most cities, especially considering its size. It's only about 16 square kilometers and there's about 80,000 people in New Westminster, but there are plenty of SkyTrain stops in New Westminster. So you don't necessarily have to rely on your car. It's a very dense city. And then on top of that, it's one of the things that people really love about New Westminster is the waterfront access. And I'm going to zoom in a little more here. Here we go, zooming in on New Westminster a bit. And you can see that it's right along the Fraser River. So the Fraser River being right here. And as a result, you have some really nice riverfront access along the waterfront here. And a lot of that has been developed in recent years and it's quite beautiful. It's a great place to go for a stroll, have the kids run around, walk the dog, enjoy a coffee on a Sunday morning. And then, as I said, it's affordability. It is one of the most affordable areas that you're going to find this close into the city of Vancouver without having to cross a bridge. And as I've mentioned in a number of other videos, if I can avoid it, I would avoid crossing bridges for the most part. The bridge crossings and the tunnel crossings that we have in Metro Vancouver really are bottlenecks. And so if you can avoid doing that, then you're ahead of the game when it comes to commuting. Another big pro of being in New Westminster is really its central location. And this is a great place to be accessing other parts of Metro Vancouver, not just into the city of Vancouver, but areas like Burnaby or Coquitlam or Crossing. And so, sorry, I should point out Coquitlam is that way. Burnaby's right beside New Westminster. And then in this direction, you're heading over to Richmond. And in this direction, you're heading to Surrey and to Langley, maybe to White Rock down in this direction. So it's at the crossroads. But this is where we have one of the cons of New Westminster is that it is at the crossroads. And so in as much as when you're living in New Westminster, you can get out to all these other areas, it is also an area that everybody is crossing through to get somewhere else. And so you can see because of these bridges, there is a lot of that happening. And as a result, there's a bit of a gridlock that happens in New Westminster. And so if you don't rely on a car, then I think being in New Westminster is fantastic. If you do rely on a car, you want to make sure that you understand that there can be massive gridlock in New Westminster because it's this relatively small space where so many other people are coming to, crisscrossing through in order to get to other places. So those are both the pros and the cons, but it's still a great family place. Definitely fantastic family amenities that have developed in New Westminster because of how many families have been moving there in the last 20 years or so. And when we're talking about SkyTrain, I did just want to point out how fantastic the SkyTrain access is here. You can see there's one over here in Sapperton, there's a couple downtown, and on the edge, really over here, you have another one and another one over here on the edge. So no matter where you are, say you're living up here, you definitely have a lot of choice as to which SkyTrain stop you might think is most convenient. So plenty of options when it comes to SkyTrain, given that this is just 16 square kilometers and there's only 80,000 people in this relatively small place. You have tons of options that are great alternatives to driving. And if you wanted to drive, you can get really quickly up Kingsway into Vancouver, depending on the traffic, or you can get out up to Highway 1, or you can get out over here into Surrey, as I mentioned earlier. So let's talk housing. In New Westminster, this is one of the few areas where you can actually find 3-bedroom condos. And I've talked about this in a number of videos that condos just really aren't an option for families because generally they stop at 2 bedrooms. You have studios, you have 1 bedrooms, and you have 2 bedrooms, but the 3-bedroom is really, really rare. In New Westminster, you do have a decent amount of 3-bedroom condos. So this would be one place that you could be looking for a 3-bedroom condo. And then of course, the price point is well below $1 million. And right now in November of 2025, the average sale price of a 3-bedroom condo in New Westminster was $860,000. So you can see right there, lots of solid options when it comes to family housing in New Westminster. There are currently 21 listings, so tons of options. In terms of townhouses, in the current market, we see the average sale price of a 3-bedroom townhouse being $960,417. 12 listings right now. Most of those are in Queensborough. And so I do want to point out, I'm going to zoom out a little bit for this. I'm going to take off the SkyTrains and mark up the map a little bit. But you can see New Westminster is right over here. But you also have this little bit of New Westminster right here, and it's separated by the Fraser River in between. And yet this is also still part of New Westminster. Queensborough is the most affordable area within easy reach of Vancouver, bar none. And it's right at the end of the island that Richmond is on. So you can see Richmond over here and Queensborough on the eastern end of that island. That's Lulu Island. And I've talked about areas where you might not want to live in a previous video, and I'm going to link that up there. But this is one of those areas where you may not want to live if you're worried about flooding, if you're worried about liquefaction in the case of an earthquake. This is an area that would be at risk. It hasn't had any issues in recent years, but it may be something that you are thinking about, and this might be an area you want to avoid. On top of that, it's also, as I was talking about traffic in New Westminster, this is much more of a bottleneck to get into and out of. And as a result, prices are considerably less. Where the average price in New Westminster for a townhouse is about $960, you can probably find a solid option in Queensborough for about $100,000, $150,000 less. They're going to be new, they're going to be nice. It is a solid family neighborhood, but I'm not as much of a proponent of Queensborough as I am up above in New Westminster on solid ground, away from the floodplain, away from the risk of liquefaction and flooding. I do have one listing that I want to bring to your attention, and that's this listing here at 131211 8th Avenue. You can see that this is built in 2021, so it's quite new, almost brand new, just 4 years old at this point. It's 1,201 square feet, and its asking price right now is $950,000. So this is a 3-bedroom townhouse in a nice area of New Westminster. What you have in this case is really a nice open living space. And this is something that we're going to find in a lot of these 3-bedroom townhouses, that the main floor is the living space where the kitchen, dining, and living room is all open. And then typically there might be a garage on the ground floor. This unit doesn't have a garage. This one has one parking space in an underground parkade, but really nice finishings, presents really well, nice and open floor plan. I think there is a half bath on the main floor, which is nice so that your guests don't have to go upstairs. You don't have to worry about people coming into your ensuite bathroom of your primary bedroom. Decent size bedrooms here as well. The master bedroom is 11 by 14 and a half feet, basically. I really like this unit. I think this is a fantastic deal. If you don't want the attached garage and if you don't need a lot of outdoor space, a lot of green space, this seems like a fantastic option, good value. Of course, you have the in-suite laundry. I did say no outdoor space, but there is a rooftop patio. This is going to be off the primary bedroom. So in this case, this isn't necessarily ideal for every family, but what you have on the second floor are the 2 bedrooms, and then on the top floor is the primary suite, which has this outdoor space, which is really, really nice. And there is a little bit of a front patio as well. So never mind what I said about not having any outdoor space. You do have some, no grass, no big yard, but a little patio and that rooftop deck as well. Those are both really, really nice. But what you don't have is that attached garage. So you can see what you have available here in New Westminster. More options will be in Queensborough. It is going to be a little bit tougher to find things in the city of New Westminster that are really solid options, but they are around in terms of townhouses as well as condos. And that's something that I would have on my list if I was a family looking for a home in Vancouver under $1 million. So if you are looking for the right family neighborhood, no matter where it is in Metro Vancouver and your budget is $500,000 or $5 million, I can help you and your family as well. I've helped hundreds of families just like yours find the right neighborhood, find the right area in Metro Vancouver that suits them, and then find their perfect home. I can help you and your family as well whenever you're ready. My contact information is right there on the screen. Reach out anytime, but for now, let's get back to the video. Next, we're moving a little further north and we're heading over to Port Moody. So Port Moody is over in this area right up here. So you can see it's directly east of Vancouver. And Port Moody does offer a few different options, and it is definitely a very popular family destination in recent years, probably again in the last 20 years or so. As people are finding Vancouver has become too expensive, they're looking for alternatives. And just as popular as New Westminster has been over the last 20 years, Port Moody has seen a tremendous influx of young families over the last 20 years or so, and massive amounts of development and change. This is another very small community. It's even smaller than New Westminster, not in terms of the geographic area, but in the number of people that live there. It's about half the population of New Westminster. About 45,000 people live in Port Moody. Some of the pros right down here, you can see Rocky Point Park. That is one of the pros. That is the jewel of Port Moody that people from all around Metro Vancouver come for. But it's also just all of the stuff that's right above Port Moody. So you're not that far from the mountains. You have Sassamat Lake right here. You have Bunsen Lake up here. You have Indian Arm right up here. And all of this, and you're right at the end of Burrard Inlet. And so you have access to the ocean, which isn't incredibly common amongst Vancouver's suburbs. You can see Vancouver kind of hogs the end of the peninsula, and so its ocean access surpasses what everybody else has. I mean, West Vancouver has some nice beaches. There's a little bit to the south in Tsawwassen and in White Rock as well. But for the most part, you know, if you're living in Surrey, if you're living in South Surrey has beaches, of course, too. But most of these suburbs to the east of Vancouver don't have ocean access. And so if you are wanting a city that is more oriented to the ocean, Port Moody is one of those places. In fact, it was originally supposed to be the terminus of the Trans-Canada Railway until it was moved at the last moment to Vancouver. And the reason that it was moved is that they realized that the end of the Burrard Inlet was going to have too much sediment. It was going to fill up too much, and it wasn't going to allow for big ocean-going vessels for much longer. And as a result, they moved it to Vancouver, which is true, because if you go to Port Moody, you're going to realize it is fairly shallow at the end of the Burrard Inlet there, but it's a very beautiful place. You're surrounded by the ocean, you're surrounded by the mountains. And so one of the biggest pros of being in Port Moody is that access to things like Rocky Point Park and to the beauty and the nature that surrounds you in Port Moody. The other thing that a lot of people love about Port Moody is the breweries. And there's a real brewery culture. If you love beer, there's some fantastic breweries in Port Moody right now. There's not a lot of sort of really great restaurants, I would say, you know, which might be one of the cons. There's not a lot of places, not a lot of diversity in what you might want to go out and eat, but they do have these great breweries, and then they have these little food trucks as well. And this is so much a part of living in Port Moody that it's a huge draw for people all around Metro Vancouver to come to Port Moody to enjoy Rocky Point Park and enjoy the breweries, spend an afternoon, a Saturday evening or something like that in Port Moody, and then head back home. But for people that live in Port Moody, it's right in your backyard. And so that's a massive draw, a massive attraction, not so much for the kids, but for you as the parents to blow off a little steam. And then one of the other big things about Port Moody, being this family that's this family oriented place, one of the big draws is actually the quality of the schools. And I would say that wasn't so much the draw of New Westminster. It really is just affordability in a place like New Westminster. But in Port Moody, the schools really do have an exceptional reputation, and that is a draw for a lot of families. Now, talking about schools, I feel like I always need to make a point that there isn't as big a difference between what we might consider an average school in Metro Vancouver and an exceptional school. We have standardized education. It is from the top down. The province, all schools get basically equal levels of funding. All public schools do. Our public school system is thought to be absolutely excellent, one of the best in Canada, and Canada globally is thought to be one of the best education systems in the world. Not the best, but very high quality. So if you're coming here from many other countries, that might be new to you. And so I wouldn't necessarily put enormous weight when I say, this is a better school district or known for better schools, but it is something to note and just be aware of. If you want more information about schools, I'm going to link up a video that I did a couple years ago about the school system in Metro Vancouver and everything that you want to know about finding the right schools, and it's going to be linked up right there. All right, so in terms of Port Moody, I think it is helpful to understand one of the cons as well, and I'm going to center Port Moody here a little more. And where I was talking about before, New Westminster, and about how it sort of crisscrosses and people crisscross through New Westminster, one of the cons about Port Moody, again, is about transportation, but it's more that it's a little bit secluded. It's up in the corner here. Like there's really nothing going on up here, right? This is all forest and mountains. And so this is a bit of a corner of Metro Vancouver, and there's no reason really other than nature to head over this way unless you live in beautiful Anmore, which if you're looking for a higher end community, that's sort of out of the way. This is a beautiful place. But Port Moody itself can be a pretty difficult place to get into and out of in the middle of rush hour. Now, if you don't need to, maybe you work from home, then not a big deal. Or maybe, you work over here in Coquitlam or you're commuting over here into Surrey. Those commutes aren't as bad, but it can be really challenging, to get off of Heritage Mountain into downtown can be a bit of a challenge because everybody is doing it at the same time. There's only a couple of ways down, and then there's only a couple ways into the city. And these can really get clogged up, in the middle of rush hour. If that's not when you're going to be commuting, if you don't need to commute, then not something that you need to be thinking of. And perhaps if you're going in a different direction, not as much of an issue for you. The other thing is that adding the SkyTrain stops, we can see that we do have a couple SkyTrain stops now in Port Moody. And that is a huge addition. And one of the things that's making Port Moody sort of a more desirable place to live for families is this access to SkyTrain. And that red dot right there, that's actually the West Coast Express. So if you just need to get downtown in the mornings, then the West Coast Express can be a great option. The SkyTrain is going to take a little more time, not quite as direct, but also an option for a lot of people living here. But you can see if you do live up here in Heritage Woods, getting over to the SkyTrain is going to be part of your commute as well. And it might not be as easy as you think. You can take a bus, but the buses aren't as frequent or as large, as dependable as they are in some other areas of Metro Vancouver. Just some things to put on your radar. But I do love Port Moody, and I think it's a fantastic place to live. The other con might be if you're worried about how much rain you get and how much cloud cover. As we get up to these northern areas, that would include North Vancouver, that would include Port Moody and Coquitlam. These are areas just below the North Shore Mountains that do get more rain, less sun than the areas to the far south. And that's just something to have on your radar as well. You might not care, you might not notice the difference. You might actually enjoy this particular location. It's not crazy, but it is something to be thinking about. So let's talk about housing. There are condos in Port Moody that you might want to have on your radar. There are 3-bedroom condos, and the average 3-bedroom condo in November of 2025 sold for $951,500. And right now there are 10 listings that are 3 bedrooms under $1 million. So you have a decent amount of options. 3-bedroom condos, just like in New Westminster, are an option in Port Moody that you should have on your radar. But I think what is a little more desirable and also still affordable are townhouses, and 3-bedroom townhouses averaged $992,889. So not that much more than those 3-bedroom condos. There are 15 listings right now that are 3 bedrooms and under $1 million in Port Moody. However, I would point out the area that I feel is a little more desirable is up here, Heritage Woods, and sort of in this central part of New Westminster, or sorry, of Port Moody. But where you're generally going to find the more affordable options is in this College Park area, just this corner of Port Moody. And this is right here. This is the most affordable part of Port Moody. And that's why you see more options in College Park than you do over here in Heritage Woods and in central Port Moody down here. But I did find a really nice option for you in Heritage Mountain that I want to talk to you about. And we're going to talk about that right now. And that's this listing here at 9255 Hawthorne. It's listed, or sorry, it just sold for $1 million. It was listed at $1,050,000. And this is a good little lesson that even if your budget is $1 million, you do want to edge up over that budget to be able to make sure that you're capturing every possibility out there. And right now we're in this market that's a little bit softer, a little bit weaker, and you're finding sellers are a little more motivated and generally will have a little more room to negotiate. And this is a good example of that. So you don't want to miss a property like this because it's in a great area of Heritage Woods. It did sell for $1 million. It's built in 2007. This is a 1,400 square foot 3-bedroom townhouse. It is a little bit older than what we found in New Westminster. It does have that open floor plan, but this is 3 levels, but most of it is actually on 2 levels. So you have this big open living area, a really nice open deck area right there. I think that's on the 2nd floor. But the main floor, the bottom floor, is just a landing because what this unit has is that attached garage that they didn't have in New Westminster. So you have a tandem garage, which means one car is parked in front of the other, but that's a really big space that can really be fully utilized. And they're saying that this has 3 parking stalls. And so what I would assume without looking into this a little further is that there's room on sort of like a little driveway to park a 3rd car. So tons of options here, really solid parking, lots of storage space as a result of that big garage attached below. And then because most of the living space, that 1,400 square feet, is on 2 levels, you have much more usable space, which I find a lot of people love, but not everybody loves that idea of having to go up that set of stairs to your main level. It is just the style that you're going to have when you have the attached garage down below in Metro Vancouver. That's typically the 2 options. You either have the main floor is your living space, and then you have 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor and you have the 3rd above. Or if you have the attached garage, generally what you'll have, that is the main floor, small landing, and then you go up to your main living space on the 2nd floor, which is going to be bigger and more open. And then you have on the 3rd floor, and in this case, that's what it is. On the 3rd floor, you have all 3 bedrooms together. And a lot of families really like having all 3 bedrooms together, especially when they have young children. So you don't have to go very far to get to your crying baby, right? This might not be as ideal as your kids get older and kids want a little more freedom, and maybe they're coming in and out later at night. Maybe they're playing loud music and stuff, and maybe there's a little more privacy desired between you and your kids. But those are the things that we grapple with, you know, in terms of families and finding the right home. It really depends on a whole lot of factors. But I think this is an excellent example of a solid family option in Port Moody. The other thing I just wanted to point out is that the maintenance fees are just over $400. And we are going to find that generally that's around the price point of maintenance fees, monthly maintenance fees around Metro Vancouver for these townhouse units that are freestanding and on their own. It is something you want to be thinking about. If you're looking at townhouses, I'm also going to link a video right here about the things you want to be thinking about when you're buying a townhouse, the maintenance fees and the difference between these units that are standalone and then the ones that are attached to a strata building. Those ones generally will have higher maintenance fees. And I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit later in one of the other areas we're going to mention. So that wraps up Port Moody and one of the other great family neighborhoods that I think people should really consider when they're looking for more affordable areas for you and your family. And now we're going to look at the 3rd area, and that's Cloverdale. And we've looked in areas that have been pretty close to the city of Vancouver. This is a further area, a little bit further out in Metro Vancouver, and I'm going to show you exactly where that is. That's Cloverdale right down here. So it's kind of snuggled in the eastern edge of Surrey here and just beside Langley. It's right at the edge of Langley. And this is another incredibly popular family neighborhood. It's become where I said, you know, New Westminster and Port Moody were really popular in the last 20 years or so. I'd say most of the attraction of Cloverdale and Clayton are in the last 10 years and definitely in the last 5 years. There's been massive amounts of family-oriented development in that area. And again, really driven by affordability. This is an area that I would highly consider as a potential for a lot of growth, a lot of change, and perhaps a really solid investment over time as more families discover that this is an option that they really should be considering. So what are the strengths? What are the pros of living in this area specifically? First of all, it's that what you're going to find here is generally quite new. And this isn't going to be the case in New Westminster necessarily or Port Moody. Yes, there are going to be some options that are newer, but on the whole, this Cloverdale and Clayton area has considerably newer developments. And so if you want something fresh and new within that $1 million budget, this is the place you really want to be focusing on. The other thing is that because of so many young families moving into this area in the last 5 to 10 years, there's a massive amount of amenities and growth that has been oriented towards families. And this really is at the forefront of what families are looking for today. It's not the most walkable area, but increasingly it's becoming walkable. So the listing I'm going to talk about is a 1-minute walk to the grocery store. That's not something that Cloverdale offered 20, 30, 40 years ago. This, when I was young, was basically a farming community. This area, big, huge lots and big open spaces and very car oriented. This is something that is now changing. People are moving away from that. They don't want that as much. And this is going to continue to change, which brings me into my next point. And one of the big pros is the coming SkyTrain that's going to be running basically along Fraser Highway, adding spots and adding an extension into Langley. It's heading a little bit further into Langley right there. So you're going to be able to get from these areas very quickly and very easily. I think it's about 45 minutes to get into downtown Vancouver. And it's not that everybody has to commute into downtown Vancouver. Again, some people work from home, or you might be wanting to live in Cloverdale and maybe you work in Langley, maybe you work in Surrey, or maybe you work in Maple Ridge. The commute to those areas, for those areas can be pretty central from an area like Cloverdale, but it's going to become even better connected to Metro Vancouver once the SkyTrain arrives, and that's coming in the next couple of years. So you're sort of at the forefront of that change when you move into an area like this. It is going to continue to change. There's going to continue to be rapid growth, rapid development, and rapid densification that's happening here. All of that can mean that this is a really good time to be investing in a neighborhood like this. On the downside, this is still relatively car dependent. This is still a place where you're going to have to spend a fair amount of time commuting if you have to commute. And maybe that's not what you want. Now, it is going to change once the SkyTrain comes, but that is just something that's the reality of right now and something that you do want to consider. If you don't want to be relying on your automobile as much, maybe this isn't an area you want to be focusing on. Maybe you should be concentrating a little more on New Westminster or maybe even in Port Moody, in some areas of Port Moody. But that's something to keep on your radar as a potential con here in Cloverdale and in the Clayton area. In this area, you're not going to find those 3-bedroom condos. And to be frank, I'm done with the areas of 3-bedroom condos. That was really New Westminster and Port Moody where those are an option. So we're not going to be talking about condos again in this video. Here, what you're going to find are 3-bedroom townhouses that are well within the budget. So in November of 2025, the typical townhouse, 3-bedroom townhouse was $772,053. This is one of the most affordable areas that you're going to find anywhere for those family homes that you're looking for. There are currently 73 listings of townhouses that are under $1 million and at least 3 bedrooms. So lots of options in this area. And I do want to point out, this is an area where you're just on the cusp of being able to afford single family homes as well. They're not going to be the largest. They're not going to be on the biggest pieces of land, but they're going to be relatively new. They're going to be built from 2000 maybe to 2010. They're going to be about 2,000 to 2,500 square feet. So they're going to be larger, good spaces. You're not going to have to deal with a strata. All of that property is yours, but the property is going to be a little bit smaller. You're looking at maybe 2,200, 2,300, maybe 3,000 square foot lots, smaller lots with these homes on them. And typical price point, typical asking price is somewhere between 1.1 right now and 1.2 million, but sale prices come below that. So we're seeing sale prices right now between 1,050,000 and 1.15 million. So some options, if you can push that budget a little bit over $1 million, you may find that you can afford a house in this area in Cloverdale and Clayton. Keep in mind that those prices that are close to $1 million at about $1,050,000, you're probably looking at something that's relatively run down on a busier street. Those are the ones that really come down quite close to the $1 million mark. If you want something a little bit nicer, you're needing to be closer in your budget to $1.1 million at least, right now at least, in the winter of 2025. Now, I do want to bring to your attention one nice example of what I'm talking about with these townhouses, and that's this one right here at 18701 66th Avenue, Unit 15. This is a 3-bedroom that's currently asking $759,000. Again, we're well over that 1,400 square foot mark. It's 1,483 square feet. Maintenance fees are $428. You do have 2 parking. So this is another unit where the 2 parking is in an attached garage at the base of the unit. And so you just have an entrance on the first floor and stairs up above into the living space. As a result, that living space and the upper floor are nice and open. This unit was built in 2005. I didn't mention that. It hasn't really been all that updated, it doesn't look like, but you can see you're spending, roughly $200,000 less in comparison to what we found in New Westminster and in comparison to what we found in Port Moody. So there are more expensive options in Cloverdale, and those would be perhaps a little bit bigger or a little bit newer. You are going to find that you can find quite large townhouse units still within that $1 million budget as well that are maybe about 2,000 square feet. And that is pretty unusual. So if you're looking for larger townhouses, this is an area to focus on and find them within that $1 million budget, something that we're not really going to find in most of the other areas that we're discovering. So the potential for more space is here. Again, this is one of those cases where you have a bigger square footage on the main middle floor with the open plan, and then the 3 bedrooms all together on the 3rd top floor as well. What you're not really getting in this unit, you get a little bit of a patio area, but you're not getting tons of outdoor space, and you're not getting something that's brand new, but you are getting this attached garage and this big indoor space that, for kids to play in, for storage, for your car collection. And apparently this development also has a guest suite, which isn't typically common with townhouse developments, and something that might be worthwhile for you, a consideration. Some amenities are more desirable than others, and that might really work for you. But I think the Cloverdale and Clayton area are definitely areas that you want to have on your radar if you're looking for the more affordable options for families and solid family neighborhood. So for our 4th area, we're moving back to Vancouver a little bit, or towards Vancouver. We were over here. We've been over here, and we've been over here, but now we're coming back and talking about Burnaby, which is the suburb that's immediately to the east of Vancouver. It is connected to Vancouver. There's no geographic feature that separates the city of Vancouver to Burnaby. And specifically, we're going to talk about this area right in here, and that's the Edmonds neighborhood. And I'm just going to make sure you understand where Burnaby is. That's basically Burnaby there. So it's a pretty large municipality, basically the same size as Vancouver. Burnaby is really known for its outdoor space. It's known for its shopping as well, and great food, sort of ethnic neighborhoods, a lot of diversity through Burnaby, and all of those are enormous pros. But we're going to talk very specifically about the Edmonds area, and I'm going to zoom in here so you get a feel for where that is. And I'm going to turn on the SkyTrain route there as well. So this roughly is what we would consider to be the Edmonds area. And one of the huge advantages of being here is, and the pros of it, is that it is really central. It is really interconnected with the region. I mean, it is similar in the way that I was talking about the pros of being in New Westminster, right? You're really easily able to get over there to Surrey, get over here to Richmond, get into the city, and maybe a little easier than from New Westminster, and also get up here onto the Trans-Canada Highway and head north into the mountains, or head east out to the Okanagan, or wherever you happen to want to go. So one of the strengths of this location is its interconnectedness, its central location, and the way that you can get to other parts of Metro Vancouver. And then of course, it's also being on the SkyTrain. And I keep bringing this up every time I talk about commuting. Yes, I realize some people do work from home. Not everybody has to get downtown, but if you want to get into the city, this is a place where you can do that relatively easily, because you have this really easy access to the Edmonds SkyTrain station. And this, quite honestly, is not a busy SkyTrain station. So this is one of the areas, like if you're living around Metrotown and you want to access this SkyTrain station, that is a crazy SkyTrain station. Some of the ones in downtown New Westminster are also quite busy down here. Edmonds on the whole is one of the quieter SkyTrain stations, I would say. So, if you want to live here and you want access to go watch a hockey game, go out for a date night in downtown Vancouver, it is really, really feasible and possible from living in this area. And so those are pros. And then of course, also just sort of the multicultural amenities. Edmonds is one of the more diverse locations that you're going to find. I mean, all of Metro Vancouver is fairly diverse, but Edmonds, I would say, has a greater diversity than most of the areas I'm talking about. And so if you want that exposure for your kids, this would be perhaps one of those areas that you'd really want to consider. In terms of cons, I would say that this feels a little bit more of an area that is more suburban, especially considering how close you are into the city. Yeah, I think this is the closest area we're talking about into downtown Vancouver, but it is far more suburban in feel than New Westminster over here. And it is more suburban than, I would say, even Port Moody. It is similar perhaps to an area like Cloverdale or Clayton, but not quite as much. But there is a bit of that suburban sprawl. There is a bit of disconnection amongst the community that's a little more here than you would find in some other areas. But I do have to say, with the caveat of that is all changing as there's more growth, more density that is coming to an area like Edmonds, and more young families moving here because of the affordability. And so let's talk about that affordability. This is a location where you're going to find 3-bedroom townhouse in November of 2025 was averaging just $930,000. So that is relatively affordable. It's not as affordable as what we found over there in Cloverdale and Clayton, but considering how close you are, this is less expensive than New Westminster. This is less expensive than Port Moody even. And so in terms of affordable family options, I think this is an area that you really do need to be considering. And then we have here the key listing that I wanted to talk about here in Edmonds. And this is at 7250 18th Avenue, Unit 119. You can see its asking price right now is $958,000. This is just 1,115 square feet on 3 levels. And so this is a little smaller than what we've typically found, right? This is about 300 square feet less. And that, I would say, is basically the size of 2 larger rooms. So that's a fair discrepancy. But you also see maintenance fees are right around that $400 mark. This is $450 every month that you'd be paying. But you do have those 3 bedrooms. What we have here is the primary being on the top floor and then 2 bedrooms on the middle floor. And then you have the living space on the ground floor. So while you do have 2 parking stalls, those 2 parking stalls are not in an attached garage. Those are 2 parking stalls that are in an underground parkade. That is going to be a little more common in this area. You're not necessarily going to see as many of those attached garages. You do have a decent amount of outdoor space. That's a lot of green for this close into Vancouver. So that's, I think, really nice and a nice feature living here. Something to have on your radar is a unit like this in Edmonds if you're looking for something closer into Vancouver under $1 million. Don't forget, we're still looking for that one area that you can find a single family house under $1 million. I don't know for sure that I'm going to find it, but I think if you stay to the end, you're going to find out. Plus, I got that bonus at the very end of this video for something that I discovered that I was pretty shocked by, and I think you're going to be as well. So you're going to want to make sure that you stay all the way to the end of this video to check those things out. And now we're heading further south, directly south, in fact, of Vancouver. Do you have any guesses where I'm heading? I've talked about this place a couple times, but where we're looking is in Richmond. And I haven't talked a lot about Richmond in videos, and it is a failing of mine. I plan on doing a little bit of content about Richmond and make sure that you understand what Richmond is like being directly south of Vancouver. But where I want to head is down here to Steveston. And so you can see we're far south, and also we're far away from up here where we tend to get much more rain, right? I keep talking about that. So southern parts of Metro Vancouver down in this region typically get more sunlight, less rain. That's going to be one of the big pros of living in a place like Steveston. What else can we say about Steveston? What do people love about Steveston? It is this quaint village. Steveston is a unique case. It's quite an old area. It had been settled for a longer period of time, at least in Vancouver terms. It was a Japanese settlement. There's a lot of Japanese history in Steveston, but it is an old fishing village and still sort of runs as, sorry, I keep zooming in and out here, but that's Steveston approximately right there. And that quaintness is something that draws a lot of families. It is a place where when you go there and you head into the village of Steveston and you go shopping, you see people interacting all around you who know one another. And at the same time, it sort of offers a bit more diversity than what you're typically going to find. The types of stores, the types of shops. There's no big box retailers in this little village. There's a lot of mom and pop shops, a lot of cute little things here to do and to see. And in all types of weather, but especially in the summer months, there's an enormous draw coming here because there really is this beautiful access to not only the ocean, but also to the Fraser River. And so this is the harbor down below here. You have Gary Point Park, which is an enormous asset and an enormous draw. You have the dike system along the water in Richmond as well, not just here, but that brings a lot of people. A lot of people just ride their bikes from Vancouver, and I've done that. Richmond is a very popular place for cycling because it is so flat. And what else can I tell you? Well, the other big draw for being a family neighborhood is the quality of the schools. And again, not an enormous difference between, the typical schools and the best schools, but this corner of Richmond is known to have some of the better schools in our region, and that is a draw for a lot of families that are moving here. And then the other draw is that it's incredibly safe. I mean, as I said, this has sort of a village feel, and it really does feel that way. It is very quaint. And one of the reasons for that is kind of you're in this corner of Metro Vancouver, and it's a place that's challenging to get to. As a result, you don't really have the issues with homelessness and drug addiction that you might find in other areas. And I had meant to mention that when I was talking about New Westminster. In the center of New Westminster, that can be a bit of an issue. In the center of Port Moody, it can be a little bit of an issue as well. In the outlying areas, it's really not. And in this area, though, it's not really a consideration at all. You're not going to notice that being an issue in Metro Vancouver when you live in an area like Steveston. But that does bring one of the downsides, and that is that lack of connection. That easy access to Steveston is lacking. There is no SkyTrain, and I'm going to quickly zoom out of here so you get an idea. Here is the SkyTrain network, and you can see that it ends right there, but we're right down here. And so that access, while possible, it's not as easy, right? So that commute, if you need to make the commute into Vancouver, can be pretty onerous. I live in sort of the central area of Vancouver, and it takes about 45 minutes for me to drive out to Steveston. And I'm not even coming from downtown. And so if you need to make that commute, that can be a pretty hefty, solid commute that you want to think twice about. Of course, you can also just drive or take the bus to the SkyTrain and then take the SkyTrain from there. That makes things a lot easier. Or maybe you don't work downtown at all, and then this isn't an issue at all. Ooh, I was meaning to do that. Maybe you're heading over into Surrey to work, or maybe you work at the airport, and then that's a much closer commute, much more convenient. But something to have on your radar as one of the cons of living in Steveston. I did do a video a little while ago about Steveston specifically, and I get much more into the pros and the cons and what it's exactly like to live in Steveston. So if you're curious, there's a video that I'm going to link up right here, and all these videos will be in the description down below as well. But just to make sure that if you want more details about some of these areas, be sure to check on those other videos that I have for you. In terms of housing, let's talk about housing. This is an area where you're going to find 3-bedroom townhouses that are within that 3 million, or within that 3 million? No, that's not affordable for most families. Within that $1 million budget. And right now, we found the average sale price of a townhouse, a 3-bedroom townhouse, is $948,500 in Steveston. And there are 10 listings right now. I do want to point out, as I'm talking about how many listings there are available, this is the winter of 2025. We have more listings than we usually do for this time of year, but this is not the most listings that we're going to find. So on the whole, as the winter progresses, as we get into the early parts of the spring, all of these areas are likely to have a few more options. And in this area of Richmond, maybe it's not 10 listings, maybe it's going to be 15. It's never going to be 100 listings, or highly unlikely that it would be 100 listings. But I just wanted to point that out as well as we're going through these. And I do want to draw your attention to an example of a listing. And that listing actually, in general, if you're looking for something newer, more of what you're going to find right now, some of the newer listings being in this corner, where this is basically the central part of the area. And being further along here isn't necessarily the most desirable. There are older listings that you're going to find. There's older construction built in the 70s mostly. And that's what the one listing that I discovered that I think is a really fantastic option is is right there. Unfortunately, it's sold, but this place is pretty darn sexy, and I think would have been a fantastic buy for whoever did buy this place. But you can see, I love that location. It's right beside basically elementary school right there, very close to a high school right over there, right next to the dike system as well. So great place for the kids to frolic and play and go out for a walk. And that listing is right here at 3211 Springfield Drive, unit 47. So it was listed for $950,000. It sold for $940,000. But you can see it was built in 1973. It's 1,367 square feet, but only on 2 levels. And those 2 levels are pretty large. We have $472 a month for maintenance fees. So this is a little more common when you're looking at these older townhouses, that they're on 2 levels rather than 3. Anything built really in the last 25 to 30 years will be on 3 levels in Metro Vancouver, mostly. But these older units that are maybe 40, 50 years old, they're going to be 2 levels. And when they're only on 2 levels, it makes all of that living space much more usable. And that's what I like about this unit. It's been updated. It shows really, really well because of how well it's been updated. And not every one of these older units is really going to be as nicely updated as that. The other benefit of these older townhouses is that you typically get more space, more land. And you can see it here. There's a really nice outdoor space, even a little patch of grass. And I love that. What you don't normally get with this style of townhouse, though, is attached parking. And that is something that you're not getting here. You do get 2 parking stalls, but these are not covered parking stalls. These are not in an underground parkade. It's not an attached garage. In fact, this is just open parking, but you do get 2 stalls. So if having a garage, if having that extra space, that storage space is really important to you, you're not getting it here. And that is something, is less common with these types of units. What may come with a unit like this, these older developments, is more often than not, what they also come with is a carport. And so there's going to be a little bit of a roof built over an open, what it would otherwise be an open parking space. So that protects your cars, but it doesn't give you that extra storage space that people, or play space that people really want when they're looking at an attached garage. But this is a really solid option. I love the location. I love Steveston in general. And I did want to point out too, that it's not just me that loves Steveston. Steveston, a couple of years ago, the CBC did a contest, and they surveyed all Vancouverites on what was their favorite neighborhood. And they did basically this. They pitted one neighborhood against another. And in order to make the next round, you had to beat the one that you were pit against in that current round. And it was an elimination process. And it came down to Steveston being the winner ultimately, and thus the favorite neighborhood for all of Vancouverites throughout Metro Vancouver. And that says a lot. There's a lot of great neighborhoods throughout Metro Vancouver, but this is Vancouverites' favorite neighborhood. But that does bring a little bit of a negative to it as well, because in the winter months, Steveston is pretty quiet. And yes, it definitely has that village feel. It still has that village feel in the summer months, but it definitely transitions into much more of a tourist destination. Not necessarily an international tourist destination, but definitely a local tourist destination. There's people from all around Metro Vancouver that descend on Steveston because of its beauty, its charm, and all that it has to offer, and that it is really different than a lot of the rest of Metro Vancouver. So it is definitely an area that I would have on your radar, that I would consider, and that we can see is relatively affordable for families still. So now we're moving from that southern corner of Metro Vancouver down here in Steveston, and we're heading north and we're heading east, and we're heading right over here to Burke Mountain. So that is a neighborhood in Coquitlam. This is a neighborhood that I discovered, actually, funny enough, when clients of mine moved from Steveston to Burke Mountain. And at the time, this was maybe a dozen years ago, I remember thinking, where are all the young families going in Vancouver? There were less and less young families in Vancouver. And again, because of affordability, when people generally had kids in the last 20 years or so, people would often move out of the city. And where were they going? It always kind of shifted and changed. Like I said, originally it was New Westminster, and then it kind of became Port Moody, and then it kind of shifted into Cloverdale. But in between, it was Burke Mountain. And at the time, I remember going out there with my clients who said, look, we want to buy a place. We love Burke Mountain. There's all sorts of development happening there. We think this is one of the best affordable family-oriented neighborhoods we can find. We're really excited about this neighborhood. And I was like, okay, I don't know the neighborhood yet, but I'm going to come with you out there. And oh my goodness, the families out there were insane. And I realized this is where all the young families were at that point in time. And it's still true today. And there's so many great things about Burke Mountain that are still drawing young families. And one of the things that is really appealing to a lot of young families is just how much new development is happening. And so the core of Burke Mountain is really up here. And these days, a lot of the newest development is sort of happening at the very edges of Burke Mountain. But even though the newest homes are in that region, we still have, most of the development that's happened in this area is really in the last 15 years, 10 to 15 years. So most of what you find in this region is relatively new in comparison, especially compared to what we just saw in Steveston, right? Another big pro of this area is just how family focused it is. And really, it is all just families that live in this area. This isn't an area as a single person you would really feel is that the type of community that you'd want to be in. You'd most likely want to be in downtown Vancouver, or even in an area like Coquitlam Center or Surrey City Center or Brentwood in Burnaby, right? Those are generally probably draws more for younger single people, but people that have young children and are settling down and looking for family-oriented developments, Burke Mountain is at the forefront of most people's wish lists. So tons of amenities, good school options, but we're going to talk about that in a second as well as one of the cons. But there are solid schools in this area. And then, of course, basically just access to nature. And so I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. And so again, that's Burke Mountain, but you have really easy access over here to all the stuff, Sasamat Lake, Bunsen Lake, Eagle Mountain up here, Pinecone Burke Provincial Park, and then of course over here, even Golden Ears. So all of that is right at your doorstep. And Pitt River and Pitt Lake up here, all of that is stuff that, the people that live in Burke Mountain are coming to this area because of that, or generally appreciate the natural assets that are surrounding you. And all of that makes this a super desirable family destination. The con would be that there is no direct SkyTrain right there. And I'm going to bring up those SkyTrain stations once again. It's not too far away. So you can see Burke Mountain is right there. And we had a recent extension, that one at Lafarge Lake in Coquitlam. That's not too far. And there is bus service that's going to connect you, or you can drive over there if you need to access the SkyTrain. You can also access, of course, the West Coast Express either down here in Port Coquitlam or over here. And again, you're probably going to need to drive or take the bus, and it's a relatively easy commute. So because you're in a corner, it is a little bit like Port Moody in that you are a bit in a corner of Metro Vancouver. It's not the most easily accessible. You are going to be much more car dependent. There's not as much sort of shopping and walkable community in Burke Mountain. There are some options within Burke Mountain, but not as much as there is in some of the other communities that we talked about. So it is a little more car dependent. And then the other thing, of course, is the weather. And we don't have to get into that again, but we are up against the mountains. You're going to find that there's going to be a little more snow. There's going to be a little more rain, a little more darkness. But if you love that, really doesn't matter to you anyways. In terms of housing, what we find in Burke Mountain right now, 3-bedroom townhouses average just under $965,000. So well within that $1 million budget, we can find options. And right now in November of 2025, there are 16 listings of 3-bedroom townhouses under $1 million. And like I said, this tends to be newer listings. So for the most part, these are going to be relatively new, built within the last 15 years or so. Really solid options. And I want to share with you one of those options. And that is this listing here at 1338 Hames Crescent, unit number 9. It was built in 2012. Its asking price is just shy of $980,000. This is just over 1,400 square feet. Again, for those 3 bedrooms, we see that the maintenance fees are a little bit lower here. So that might be attractive at just $350 a month. And this is one of those developments where you have the ground level is basically the attached garage. So you do have tandem parking, you do have 2 parking stalls, and you have that sort of base entrance where you just access a set of stairs upwards and come up to your living space. And so most of that square footage is again separated on just 2 levels rather than 3, making all of that square footage much more usable. And this is going to feel a little more open and inviting as a result. You do have then those 3 bedrooms all on 1 floor, which I think, again, a lot of young families really like. And then because we're a little bit elevated here, and this is the same whether you're in Heritage Woods over in Port Moody or over here in Coquitlam with Burke Mountain, but you do have that possibility possibility of these open views and a little more light coming in because of that. And especially if you want more light, you want to be facing that southern direction. And this one too, I think has some pretty good outdoor space, right? Like big patios, big decks, open views, and a little patch of grass. Plus you have that attached garage, that indoor space for your cars, for kids to play in the winter, or just extra storage space. And I think all of those make this a really solid family option for something under $1 million. We're almost at the end, and I still haven't talked about or much about single family homes, and we still haven't found an area where we can find them under $1 million within Metro Vancouver. Is it possible? Well, the answer happens to be, yeah, it is possible to find it in Metro Vancouver. And that one area where we can find it, or basically where it's going to be easiest to find it, is Maple Ridge. And Maple Ridge, incidentally, is an area that I covered in a video in great detail. I'm going to link that for you right here. If you want more information about Maple Ridge, that's the place you want to head to. But first, stick with me here. We're going to talk about Maple Ridge, and where exactly is it? Well, Vancouver's right here. And where are we heading now? Well, we're heading way over here to Maple Ridge. And yes, Maple Ridge is on the eastern cusp of Metro Vancouver, but it's still very much a part of Metro Vancouver. It is really well connected. That is one of the big pros of living in Maple Ridge, but we're going to talk about all the pros and a couple of the cons in this video. And so let's do that right now. So there we have Maple Ridge right there for us. And what is one of the biggest things, one of the biggest draws these days for people is really its affordability. I mean, it is hard to imagine that you can still afford a house in Metro Vancouver under $1 million, but you can do it here in Maple Ridge. We came close in Cloverdale and Clayton, but not quite. We are able to do it well within the budget here in Maple Ridge. And we're going to talk about a specific example of that. But Maple Ridge has changed tremendously in the last 10 years or so. And the big reason for it is these connections right here. These connections are really what has made an enormous difference for Maple Ridge and why it's seen so much growth within the last 10 years or so. The Golden Ears Bridge is a brand new connection. Before the Golden Ears Bridge, there was no bridge to the south. You had to take a little ferry that took about 20 cars at a time. It was free, but it would take you forever to cross. And so that connection between Maple Ridge and everything to the south, whether it's Surrey or Langley, has been improved crazily by the addition of the Golden Ears Bridge. But it was also changing this bridge right here that made a huge difference, because this used to be a drawbridge, and every once in a while you were basically just completely cut off in Maple Ridge. That is now a fixed link. There is no more drawbridge. And so this connection between Maple Ridge and the rest of Metro Vancouver has just improved tremendously. And it's made an enormous difference for how people view Maple Ridge and for the way that it's developed in the last 10 years or so. It's also made a difference for affordability. Things have gotten much more expensive in Maple Ridge, but it is still relatively affordable in comparison to everything else going on throughout Metro Vancouver. So those connections are big pros. The affordability is a big pro, but also you still have an option to commute, and not everybody needs to, and it depends on where you need to commute. But if you need to get into Vancouver, you can do that right here along the West Coast Express, and right there is a station. So that is a phenomenal change and has made living in Maple Ridge a real solid option for young families trying to find a house and who still might need to commute into downtown Vancouver or into other parts of Metro Vancouver. And so for all of those reasons, there's a lot of pros going on here. Now, in terms of cons, I would say that mostly it has to do with transportation. While these transportation connections have improved tremendously, and yes, it is easier and quicker to get in and out of here than it ever has been, it is still an enormous hassle. And especially if you're living in these areas, whether it's Albion or Webster's Corner or Silver Valley, these are all sort of like the more desirable, newer family developments around Maple Ridge. Getting in and out of those can be a real pain. It's not that bad once you get on the highway, but to get to the highway and out into areas like Surrey or into Coquitlam, that can be a real bottleneck. And so you do want to consider those commutes if you have to be making those commutes. I would say that's the biggest downside. And then to a certain extent, it's also just being aware that crime can also be a consideration in Maple Ridge. And yes, once again, it has to do with mental illness and drug addiction and homelessness. It is generally petty crime, and it is generally sort of in this very central part of Maple Ridge, not as much in these outer areas where most of the families are moving, but it is something to be putting on your radar. And then Also, Maple Ridge is known for a little more crime than most areas. It has this connection to more significant sort of gang violence and biker gangs in particular. Whether that's true or not, I don't have the inner details, but it is something that people think about and talk about. I don't know if it's as much a part of daily life in Maple Ridge as it once was, but those are considerations to have in mind. Now, in terms of affordability, I did promise you that Maple Ridge is the place that we're going to find that single family house, and we can find it. And so while the average for a house in Maple Ridge is just under $1.25 million, there are options for houses under $1 million, and quite a few of them, in fact. In December of 2025, there are 46 listings of houses under $1 million. And that is insane when you consider it's almost impossible to find them anywhere else in Metro Vancouver. You can find them here. One of the houses that came up for me as a really solid option is this house in the Albion area of Maple Ridge, where at 24277 102A Avenue, we have this 2,200 square foot house at just shy of $900,000. So well under the budget. There's going to be more options of newer houses. This one is built in 2000, but some of the newer houses are going to be a little closer to $1 million. Obviously, there's also going to be houses well over $1 million. This house is on a smaller lot. So similar to what we saw in Cloverdale and in Clayton, these houses are on small lots, that the affordable houses. If you want a big lot, most likely it's going to be an older house. It's going to be a little bit smaller, most likely in the lower price range. This lot is 2,300 square feet. So smaller lot, very similar size of house. This is a 3-bedroom house. It does not have a garage, which is part of, I think, why this is a little more affordable as well. But this is your own piece of land. You don't have to worry about maintenance fees. You don't have to be worried about being forced to do anything by the strata, any kind of mismanagement. Your future is your own, and this is your own piece of land with a nice piece of yard. And this is an area where there's tons of families, tons of young families living. So if you're looking for affordable detached homes under $1 million, you're going to be able to find them in Maple Ridge. But before we finish, I'm still not done yet. I got that bonus surprise for you coming right up. So what is that surprise that I have in store for you? Well, it's that you can actually find affordable family homes in the city of Vancouver. And most people don't even think that that's a possibility. But the truth is that they do exist. You just have to know where to look, and you have to be able to make a couple compromises. So let me talk a little bit about where you might be able to find more affordable homes in the city of Vancouver. And that is mostly in this corner. So the southeast corner of the city is where you're going to find them. I do want to point out this area is Champlain Heights. It also contains the River District. In this area, we're going to find some 3-bedrooms. We're going to find a couple condos that families are going to find are really good family homes. And you're still able to be in Vancouver. Now, most people that are moving to Metro Vancouver, at the forefront of their minds is being in the city of Vancouver. You don't have to be. I've shown you great family neighborhoods throughout Metro Vancouver that are really accessible. This is a relatively small geographic area, so you're not losing too much. But if your priority is still to be in the city of Vancouver, you can still do it within this $1 million budget and find good family homes. What are some of the pros of being in this region of the city of Vancouver? Well, the biggest pro is, if it's a priority for you, that you're able to afford within that $1 million budget to still be in the city of Vancouver, something that most people, as I said, don't really realize that they can afford. And the other thing is the shorter commutes. So if you do need to be within the city of Vancouver, if you do commute downtown, this is an area, this is as close as we're getting into downtown Vancouver for a 3-bedroom within easy reach. And that again is a big pro for a lot of people. And then of course, it's also the access to nature. And down in this corner of Metro Vancouver, what you have is access to the Fraser River. You have Everett Crowley Park right here. That's the green space. And you also have in River District down below here, you have a lot of sort of an orientation to the water, a lot of amenities that are being built along the Fraser River. So that's something that people do enjoy here. And that is a draw. In terms of cons, this is a corner of the city that does feel a little bit different than the rest. And 49th, I would say, is really the separation where things start to feel a little more suburban in these areas, whether it's Sunset or Killarney or Victoria Fraser View or Champlain Heights. It does all feel a little more suburban than the other areas of Vancouver up in this direction to the north. And that is something to have on your radar. And the other thing I want to point out, and you can see that the way that the SkyTrain network has developed, this corner is one that is least convenient to that. You really have to get up to Metrotown. That's where it's going to be closest. Now, it is certainly possible, but for the most part, if you're living in Champlain Heights, if you're living in River District just below, you're sort of in these areas that are more car reliant than most of the rest of the city of Vancouver. And for that reason, you're seeing sort of less of a draw. People generally want these really walkable communities. And increasingly, not necessarily Champlain Heights, but the River District is becoming that really walkable community as that gets built out. And that is making it a little more desirable to be in this corner of the city, but just something to have on your radar. Right now, the typical townhouse that is sold in November of 2025 sold for $942,000. Now, honestly, that is really shocking. That is what made me want to talk about this, because that affordable 3-bedroom home is within reach within the city of Vancouver limits, and something that most of us don't realize, as I keep saying. The thing is, there's not a lot of them. There's only 2 current listings here for freehold, but there are 6 options that are leasehold options. I'm not necessarily a huge proponent of them, but in Champlain Heights, that is an option. There are more leaseholds than there are freehold. And so as a result, there's currently 8 listings in this area that are 3 bedrooms or more and within that $1 million budget. I do want to bring your attention to one listing I found in particular, and it's actually not a townhouse. It is this listing at 3581 East Kent Avenue North, Unit 409. It is a penthouse just on the 4th floor. It's quite new, built in 2020, and this is 1,135 square feet. So this is massive for a condo. You do have 3 bedrooms and a lot of space. And because it is really mostly on one single level, most of that space is really, really usable, which is fantastic. This is sort of the equivalent of maybe a couple hundred more square feet when you're in a 3-level townhouse, right? Because you're not getting it all cut up by stairs. This is really new, really nice, huge outdoor space. And that's the enormous advantage of this particular listing. Apparently there's over 2,000 square feet of outdoor space, and that essentially becomes your yard. The drawback on this listing, as we can see, is right here. And that's that maintenance fee of, I kind of obscured it, didn't I? But $835 a month in maintenance fees. That's about double what we're finding in most of the townhouse developments. So that's something you want to be considering, and realize that this is a bit of a cap on how expensive this unit becomes, because most people that are looking at it are trying to compare it to other options, and they're not going to be, essentially you're looking at your outlay every month, and that includes your mortgage payment, your taxes, and your maintenance fee. And if you're paying $400 a month more here, well, you're not going to be able to afford as much of a mortgage, right? So that is understandable. That's part of the reason that this is the price on this is a little bit lower, but the point is, there is an affordable option here for you in the city of Vancouver. And there's one other one I want to mention, and that's my own listing, in fact. And this should open up, I just want to bring this to your attention because it kind of opens up the possibilities. In a way, you know, what I talk about often is needing to find compromises. And this is an area where you might want to consider a compromise. This is a really solid townhouse. It's 1,225 square feet. It's $950,000, the asking price, but it is just 2 bedrooms. The reality is this unit doesn't have that 3rd bedroom, but what it does have is the size. It is built in 2007, so perhaps there's a little bit of updating that you want to do. You know, the carpets are worn, the flooring's a bit worn, but it shows really, really well. There are 2 parking stalls in an underground garage. There's tons of storage. There's an external storage locker, plus tons of storage that's internal. But what it has is those 2 bedrooms, and then this space, this den space. This unit has been owned over the last, 18 years by 2 different families. One stayed there for about 5 years and the other for about 12 years. And both of them bought this unit because of this option, to be able to use this internal den as a bedroom. And they had young kids. They used this as a bedroom for a number of years. And this was a compromise that they made. Instead of, for them, they didn't want to move out into the suburbs. They didn't want to make that commute in from Cloverdale every day or from Burke Mountain. They wanted to live in the city and have a space that could be used by their family. And this is the compromise that they made. And this is generally the compromise that people buying this unit are going to face. And part of the reason that this unit is less expensive. If it had 3 full bedrooms, it would probably be another $150,000, maybe $200,000 more than this unit. But I just wanted to draw that to your attention, so you're thinking about some of the alternatives, some of the ways that this might work for you, a move to Vancouver within a budget. But of course, I think we also understand that there are some really great options throughout Metro Vancouver for families within that $1 million budget. We can find them. They're neighborhoods not only that I would move to, but I help my clients move to every single day. And of course, I am a real estate agent that has helped hundreds of families do exactly what you're trying to do right now, and that is move to Vancouver. So if you're looking for an agent that can help you not only find the right neighborhood, but find the right area and the right home, you can reach out anytime. My contact information is right there on the screen. And if you're not quite ready to do that, I have over 150 videos all about moving to Vancouver and living in Vancouver that can help you do further research. If there's one video that I'd love to meet you on, it's this video right here. This video was all about where you want to move to. This video right here is all about where you don't want to move to. So make sure you're not making a massive mistake when you move within Metro Vancouver. Thank you so much for watching this video and sticking with me all the way to the end. I hope to see you next week.